So I've been promising you a video on evolution, and today is the day that I get to enlighten your brains with evolution, how it became to the theory that it is now, and all the individuals aside from Darwin that actually helped ordain this mentality. As many of you guys may be aware, a lot of the scientists who helped with the idea of evolution were actually also men of religion. And these men of religion were trying to find a closer connection to the Almighty, their version of God, or God is in the Christian belief. So they would research and take what they observed and what God put in front of them and try to connect. First, I'm going to start off with listing the people pre-Charles Darwin who actually helped with the path in the order in which they helped. You have James Holton, who wrote a book on geology and basically dated the Earth back to, 6 billion years, many years before the Bible had stated it. He did this through using layers, and Earth layers, and decay, and determined that there's no possible way that the Earth is as young as many people claimed it to be, which put him into a shock and a spiel. So this actually started to rock the boat initially for many of the beliefs in the Christian world. Following Holton was Charles Lyell, and what he did is he took those layers and basically determined that some of the sediment found here exists here, but exists in lesser amounts. So how is this possible? What does this tell us? Where does it all come from? He's basically started creating the foundation for how we do dating now. Then afterwards you had Hooke, who discovered fossils in these layers and determined that these fossils were the remains of creatures that existed before. Of course, as many of you are probably aware, though I'm not sure all of you are fully aware, that fossils have to exist in a very particular climate in order for them to exist. When a body dies, it has to die in with a specific temperature and a specific position in order for the fossil to actually fossilize, so it doesn't decay. So many of these, as you could probably imagine, were found near the seashore. So he began charting what he found and where he found them, and to his shock, there were fish he found at higher layers and animals with legs, and he just couldn't come to understand why. So this is how the idea of things happening at different times, things surviving, things going extinct, started. From Hooke, you had Cuvier. Cuvier basically brought to the table catastrophism, this was his explanation for what Hooke found. The reason that we find these fossils in these odd positions are because some big, huge catastrophe occurred, and only a certain amount survived, and those that survived are the ones that lived on. Which made sense, especially into the Christian community. It was basically God made this happen, and he started to rid the world of little parts of species, time after time. From Cuvier, you have Ray, who started to classify plants and animals, but even before that, when we go back into the Greek history, you have like Socrates and Aristotle, Socrates, my apologies, I pronounce it Socrates. You have Socrates and Aristotle who started listing off as many animals as possible because they believed that this mighty being, this God, created all these animals, so there has to be a number to them. So that's where you started labeling. And what Ray did is he took what he found from that research and expanded it to modern day. Not so modern. After Ray, you had Linnaeus, who was basically the headstrong individual who started taxonomy, giving us a species and a genome. So like Homo sapiens, that's an example of what he did. He classified animals based on their characteristics and how they ate. Then after Linnaeus, you have Malthus, who basically said that our characteristics that survive were advantageous. I know it sounds similar, I'll be getting to that in just a moment. Malthus said that these characteristics that he found in the fossils particularly showed that as the climate changed on the Earth, the ones that survived were the ones that are well adapted to that environment, or the animals, not necessarily species related, but like animals. So there was a flood, there are more fish, and obviously those who have legs and breathe air aren't going to survive, that type of thing. From Malthus, you have what we all know is an incorrect, or the scientific world has deemed incorrect, as Linnaeus and Irenaeus Darwin. This is Charles Darwin's grandfather. Not Linnaeus, Lamarck. My apologies, Lamarck. Lamarck's theory was that traits inherited throughout a lifetime can be passed on to the next generation. He used the idea of the giraffe as an example, that the giraffes had really short necks and then they stretched a little bit, and their necks grew a little longer, and then their kids were born with necks that were a little longer. Since his discovery, the scientific community has deemed it invalid. Darwin agreed, though, that traits could be passed on through the parent to offspring. He just didn't know how. And this is where Charles Darwin comes into play. Charles Darwin is, that was my paper flipping, sorry, I have notes. Charles Darwin is the individual we most accredit with evolution because he brought to the table something that was very important and something that we all can basically agree to. We being the scientific community, if I include myself in that. Darwin's theory of evolution, he kept to himself as long as he could. The only thing he really put out during his lifetime, the origin of species, he left out the word human or man. And he did this because he didn't want to be ridiculed for his beliefs or for what he was finding. He didn't believe it to be true himself. So this is what he basically found. He discovered natural selection. Natural selection is an adaptation or a mutation that occurs within a species, allowing some members of the species better equipped to survive and to have more of an evolutionary success, meaning they can reproduce. So that's natural selection, or descent with modification is also another way that it's interpreted. Many people attribute Darwin's belief to the idea that there's a common ancestor way back when, which is true in how Darwin is beginning to interpret things. So Darwin's basically, this is how one of my professors explained it to me. Say you have one species of turtle, and say that the human race decides to come in and, build roads, and if these divide these turtles, well, the turtles that are better equipped to survive in the different climates and different environments are going to survive and reproduce, whereas those that are not better equipped will eventually die out. And what happens is, over vast amounts of time, these individuals will no longer be able to reproduce with one another. Not necessarily because they can't reproduce with one another, possibly because of timing, when they eat, how they eat, their size, body parts, things like that. And a good way to understand that is think of dogs. Think of, because dogs are the same species, we all can agree on that. Think of, like, I don't know, a Great Dane trying to procreate with a Chihuahua. It isn't going to happen. And it's not because they're different species, but because it's physically impossible. Things of that nature. So things like that happen where we begin to separate and create our own little groups with different characteristics. And that's basically what his idea of evolution is. Change over time. Now there are 4 evolutionary factors that push evolution to what we know it as today. The first factor is natural selection. Basically, those well adapted to survive in their environment will therefore survive in their environment, and those ill adapted will not. Mutation, which is a change in your genetic coding, so your DNA has some weird ass change, excuse the profanity, has a weird ass change that your body keeps and you pass on to your offspring. Gene flow, which are the traits between populations in some way, usually due to transportation, intertwine. So you have, like, say, people from India and people from the United States, because of transportation, can, do the nasty and have children. And those children have those certain genes, and that's a form of evolution. And you have gene drift. Gene drift is more like groups. You have a large group, and then a tiny little group goes off. So it's basically, say you have this large group, and a tiny little group gets stranded on a little desert isle, and only those characteristics are represented in that group. So in a nutshell, that is evolution. Evolution is basically the ability to adapt, and over time, characteristics becoming so different that you can't reproduce with other different characteristics, not necessarily because of interspecies anything, but because of environmental and physical aspects. Alright, well, I'm hitting 10 minutes. That is all of it in a nutshell, and tomorrow I will be putting up creationism and intellectual design. It'll be fun. Oh, and hi, Care Bear. This is no lighting change. You can't see it still. I have a bad camera, so, well, I'll explain it to you later. Alright, well, take care, everybody, and tune in tomorrow for some more fun with controversial commentary.